It begins with stillness. The kind of stillness that is not simply the absence of noise, but the presence of something older, heavier, more enduring. A stillness carried by the earth itself, layered in stone, settled in sediment, pressed into silence by the weight of centuries. You stand, or perhaps simply imagine standing, in a place so far removed from the maps of human memory that the air itself feels ancient. A valley carved by forgotten rivers. A desert where the wind sculpts the ground into soft, endless waves. Or perhaps a plateau high enough that the thinness of the air makes time seem slower. Here, nothing suggests that a city ever lived. No walls pierce the horizon. No roads point toward a center. The earth rises and falls in its own quiet geometry, and the only movement is the occasional drift of dust, the long breath of the land. And yet, under your feet, there is something. Something the earth has kept hidden, not out of malice, but out of the same slow patience with which it shapes mountains and wears them down again. It is the patience of geological time, which measures in ages, not seasons. For thousands of years, this place was simply itself, a wide plain under the watch of the moon, where shadows crossed in predictable patterns, a place of absence, of solitude. To the people who lived in nearby lands, it was not a destination, only a boundary, somewhere to pass by, somewhere that offered no water, no fertile soil, no reason to linger. And then, as it always happens in stories of discovery, there was an accident. A survey team looking for mineral deposits. A lone pilot scanning the land from the sky. A satellite image meant for something entirely different, revealing not randomness, but pattern. At first, it was only a faint line, then a cluster of angles impossible in nature. Geometries too straight to be the work of wind or rain. Shapes that could only belong to intention. The earth had been holding its secret, but even the deepest secret can shift when the surface changes, when erosion or drought or a single storm moves just enough soil to whisper a clue. That whisper became an excavation, and with it came the first real shock. Not the existence of ruins, for ruins can be found in many places, but their nature. Because this was not a settlement built by nomads pausing in their journey. This was not a village at the edge of a known kingdom. It was a city, an entire city, with roads, courtyards, walls, and structures that suggested purpose, planning, and permanence. And it was in the wrong place. Not just geographically, but historically. According to everything we thought we knew, there should have been nothing here. No culture advanced enough to build on this scale. No reason for such a city to exist at all. The first stones were cleared by careful hands. Archaeologists moved slowly, as if awakening something from a deep sleep. Dust was brushed away in strokes so light they barely disturbed the air. Each layer revealed more, a fragment of wall, a set of stairs, the curve of what might have been a tower. The quiet of the site was not just physical but temporal. Each stone had been waiting for this moment longer than any living thing on earth had been alive, waiting to be seen again. And as they were uncovered, the question began to grow, the question that would shape every thought, every conversation, every late-night speculation. Who built this? Civilizations are like constellations. We know them by the way they connect, by the trade routes, the shared languages, the overlapping mythologies. But here, there was no connection, no trail leading backward into the known history of the region. This city floated alone, like a star in an uncharted sky. The early surveys brought more confusion, pottery fragments with designs that matched no known tradition, stonework with techniques neither primitive nor matching the style of surrounding cultures, a layout that hinted at both practical governance and ceremonial purpose. It was as if the city's builders had sprung into existence already knowing what to do. as if the learning curve that shaped most civilizations had been skipped entirely. That thought, whispered at first, began to unsettle even the most measured researchers, because it hinted at one of two possibilities, both equally improbable. Either there was once a civilization so completely erased from history that we had never even guessed at it, or the builders had come from somewhere else entirely. The mind resists such possibilities the way the eye resists seeing a color it has never known. We are trained by education and by comfort to believe in gradual progress, in a chain of cause and effect, where every achievement is linked to what came before. But here, in the stillness of this place, that chain was broken. Here, in a land where no human city should have been, a city had been. It had lived, it had thrived, and it had vanished so completely that the earth had almost forgotten it. Standing in the heart of its ruins, the silence feels heavier than any answer. For the earth does not rush to tell its stories. It waits until we are ready to hear them, until our questions have sharpened enough to match the depth of its memory. And so, the discovery began not with answers, but with a weight in the air, the sense of standing at the edge of a vast darkness, knowing only that something is there. Something vast, something older than our memory, but younger than the stone beneath it. A city whose name we do not know. It will take years to uncover the extent of it. Years of digging, of cataloging, of comparing, of arguing. Years in which theories will rise and fall like the civilizations they attempt to describe. But here, at the very beginning, before the first measurements are taken, before the first artifact is cataloged, before the world begins to argue about its meaning, there is only this. A quiet place, a secret beneath the soil, and the knowledge, heavy and thrilling, that the earth has just given up one of its secrets, and that it may not be the only one. The silence closes around you again, but it is a different silence now. Not the silence of emptiness, but of anticipation. For the city is still sleeping, and you are only just learning how to wake it. The first clue did not come from the ground, but from the air. Or perhaps it came from somewhere older, from an idea carried across centuries in fragments, scribbled in margins, whispered in the back rooms of libraries. Among the earliest hints was a map, not one that belonged to our modern world of satellites and digital imaging, but one drawn in ink on rough parchment, its edges darkened by time. It had been stored away in a collection of navigational charts from an era when much of the earth was St. The chart was strange in its confidence. It depicted coastlines almost exactly as they appear today, though it had been created long before such accuracy should have been possible. But it was not the coast that drew attention. It was an inland mark, a symbol, placed deep in a barren region where, according to everything we thought we knew, no cities had ever stood. A tiny square, almost an afterthought, accompanied by a word in a language only partly understood. No historical records matched it. For decades, the mark was dismissed. Cartographers were known to embellish, to guess, to invent details based on rumors. A single strange symbol was nothing unusual in the era of exploration. And so the square remained forgotten, hidden in a folded map in a drawer that no one opened anymore, until technology turned its gaze toward the same patch of land. Aerial surveys meant for mineral exploration captured patterns in the soil, lines faint enough to be invisible from the ground, but clear when seen from above. They were too straight, too deliberate to be the work of wind or water. From the air, they formed an outline, a ghostly grid, the suggestion of streets and walls stretching far wider than anyone expected. Satellite imagery deepened the mystery. Advanced imaging techniques peeled back layers of Earth without a single shovel being lifted, revealing more geometry beneath the surface. The patterns were unmistakable, an entire planned layout. And yet, according to every archaeological map, this area was blank. No record of settlement. No history of habitation. The nearest known ancient cultures had flourished hundreds of miles away, in entirely different environments. The question sharpened. If there was a city here, who had placed it in a place no civilization should have reached? Some turned back to the old map in search of answers. Who was its maker? How had they known? Had they seen the city themselves, or merely heard of it from travelers, or inherited the knowledge from someone even older? The deeper the researchers looked, the more they found traces of wandering accounts, not in official histories, but in the margins of them. Traders speaking of a settlement far to the west, where stone gleamed under the sun. Sailors claiming that rivers once ran where now there is only dust. But these were scattered, contradictory, fragmented. Perhaps they thought the mapmaker was preserving a legend. But legends have roots, and roots have soil. The soil here, when tested, told its own story, a story of a land that had once been different. It had known what are centuries, times when rivers may have flowed and the air was not so dry. The climate had shifted, slowly at first, then with sudden cruelty, until whatever lived here had no choice but to leave. And yet, how had we lost all memory of it? History, we tell ourselves, is cumulative. We build upon the knowledge of those before us, layering facts upon facts until the story of humanity stands firm. But it is an illusion. For every known page, there are entire libraries that have burned, entire voices that have gone silent, entire cities erased from memory. And sometimes, as with this city, even the erasure leaves no scar, only an absence so complete that we forget to look. Until, by chance, a line on an old map and a pixel on a new one point to the same place. Until the past calls out through two very different languages, the ink of human hands and the data of machines, telling us, in their own ways, that we have missed something. And that something waits. The discovery of the old map did not prove the city's existence. But it did something more powerful. It gave permission to imagine it. And imagination, once lit, becomes difficult to extinguish. Soon the map was no longer a curiosity. It was evidence. Not the kind that could stand in a court of science, perhaps, but enough to send people into the field. Enough to send boots into dust and shovels into soil. Enough to draw the gaze of the world toward a place it had once ignored. From the air, from the ground, and from the oldest shelves of forgotten archives, the lines began to converge. And at the center of those lines was a question too large to ignore. If this city had stood here, in defiance of geography, of climate, of history, what else have we overlooked? What other names lie unspoken beneath the quiet earth? The answers would not come quickly, but they would begin, in dust and in stone, and in the slow patience of excavation. Because now the secret was not only the earth's to keep. The day the first stone was uncovered, there was no fanfare, no camera crews, no trumpets of discovery, only the soft scrape of a trowel against compacted soil and the slow exhale of wind moving across the plain. It began with texture, a resistance beneath the blade that was not the grainy give of dirt, but something harder, smoother, older. The archaeologist paused, not out of doubt, but from the quiet reverence that comes when one realizes they may be the first person in centuries, perhaps millennia, to touch this surface. A few more strokes, gentle enough not to harm, revealed the edge of a block. Not a boulder rounded by nature, but a shape defined by intent, a line too straight, a corner too sharp to be anything but made. The team moved carefully. Brushes replaced blades, bristles whisking away the centuries. The soil clung stubbornly, as if reluctant to give up what it had been cradling for so long. Dust curled into the air and caught the sunlight, shimmering briefly before disappearing again into the breeze. What emerged was a wall, not standing tall, but lying low, half swallowed by the earth. Its surface was worn, yet the tool marks still whispered their presence. Shallow grooves, faint ridges, and a rhythm of chiseling that hinted at hands working with both purpose and skill. They called it the first breath, the moment the city seemed to wake, drawing in air after its long burial. The stone, once part of a living structure, now met the light again. It is a humbling thing to unearth stone shaped by human hands long before your own lifetime. The thought comes quietly. These blocks were once chosen, lifted, carried, placed. Their weight was known not as an abstraction, but as strain in muscles and ache in bones. The decision of where to place them was not ours. It belonged to someone whose name is lost, whose language we do not know, whose reasons we can only imagine. Stone is patient, but it is not eternal. It remembers in fractures and weathering, in lichen that roots into its pores, in the way corners blunt over centuries. Yet, if left alone long enough, it can survive nearly anything: fire, flood, the collapse of its own structure. It outlives roofs, outlives wood, outlives the flesh of those who built it. And when it finally reappears, it carries with it a kind of gravity, not the gravity of mass, but of meaning. As more earth was removed, the outline of a larger structure began to emerge. The wall was part of a chamber, perhaps ceremonial, perhaps functional. It was too early to know. The floor was still buried, the doorways blocked by centuries of sediment. But the space felt intentional. Some of the stones were enormous, far larger than any single person could lift unaided. This was not random placement. These were architectural choices that required planning, tools, and the cooperation of many hands. Nearby, another team brushed away dirt to reveal a flat slab, its surface faintly etched. The marks were not clearly writing, not yet, more like patterns, or perhaps the beginnings of symbols. The lines curved and intersected in ways unfamiliar, hinting at an artistic or communicative system unlike any known in the region. There was a quiet murmur among the team, not of excitement exactly, but of the shared awareness that something important was taking shape beneath their feet. They had moved beyond the abstract certainty of maps and aerial imagery into the tangible truth of stone. Stone that could be measured, touched, studied. It is one thing to see the ghost of a city from above. It is another to kneel in the dust and touch the work of the hands that once lived there. In that moment, time feels less like a line and more like a breath, inhaling the past into the present. Days turned into weeks, and the dig expanded. The chamber's walls connected to others, the ground revealing a network of spaces, some aligned, some offset in ways that suggested later construction phases. The stone varied, some quarried locally, some transported from miles away. Transporting such heavy material across barren land would have been no small feat. It spoke of an organized society with resources, knowledge, and perhaps a reason powerful enough to justify the effort. At night, after work ended, some of the team lingered at the edge of the site. They would sit in the fading light, watching the stones catch the last sun before darkness took them again. In those moments, you could almost feel the city's slow return to awareness, as though it too were remembering itself. And yet, the most striking thing about these first weeks of excavation was not the structures themselves, but the silence between them. For all their size and endurance, the stones spoke only in hints. No inscriptions yet explained their builders. No artifacts yet told their daily lives. The city was breathing again, but it had not yet begun to speak. That would come later. For now, the earth had given only enough to prove that the city was real. The rest, the why, the who, the how, still slept beneath the soil. At first, there was an unspoken assumption that once the stones were cleared and artifacts recovered, the city would find its place in the great web of human history. We would give it a date, a culture, a lineage. We would connect it to something already known, as we always do. That is how archaeology tends to work. Every discovery is a piece of a puzzle, fitting neatly into the picture already forming. But here, the puzzle itself seemed unfamiliar. It was as though we had opened a box expecting to find more of a familiar scene, only to realize these pieces belonged to an entirely different image, one we had never even considered. The first pottery fragments came back from analysis with troubling results. Their clay composition did not match any known source from surrounding cultures. The firing techniques were unusual, not primitive, but distinctly different. The decorative patterns were unlike anything in the archaeological record, abstract, geometric, and entirely without the animal motifs or agricultural scenes common to civilizations of the same general time frame. The script, if it was a script, offered no bridge to the known world. Linguists examined the etched slabs and returned with a rare verdict. The symbols matched no existing writing system, ancient or modern. No known alphabet, no borrowed characters, no resemblance to the protoscripts of early trade or ceremonial record-keeping. Languages leave fingerprints. Even the most isolated can share structural echoes with their neighbors. But here, there was nothing to hold on to. As if these people had invented their system in complete solitude, without outside influence. The absence of connections was more than unusual, it was unsettling. Civilizations do not generally appear in total isolation. Ideas travel, technologies migrate, cultural habits bleed across borders. Yet here was a culture that seemed to have sprung fully formed, with architecture, engineering, and artistry entirely their own, and then vanished, leaving no clear descendants, no gradual blending into later societies. It was not only the material culture that refused identification. The city's layout did not conform to the expected patterns. It lacked the concentric defenses common to frontier settlements, yet also lacked the sprawling, chaotic growth of trade hubs. Its streets and plazas suggested a precise plan, but a plan unlike those of known empires, where every axis had political or ceremonial significance. Here, the logic was elusive, as though the priorities of its builders were guided by principles unfamiliar to us. In meetings, the researchers tried to speak in cautious terms. An outlier, someone would say. Anomalous, another suggested. But privately, the word they avoided pressed on everyone's thoughts. Unclassifiable. A nameless civilization is more than a curiosity, it is a disruption. It forces us to question the neatness of our timelines, the certainty of our maps, the completeness of our knowledge. And yet, there is a strange poetry in anonymity. Names are for the living, for those who can speak them. Without a name, this city belonged to everyone and no one, drifting untethered through history like an unclaimed star. Of course, there were theories. Some argued it must be a lost branch of a known culture, one that split off and developed its own identity before collapsing. Others suggested it was the work of migrants from far away, perhaps shipwrecked or displaced, who built what they could with the skills they carried. But none of these theories fit all the evidence. The style was too distinct, the technology too specific, the absence of shared traits too complete. In the evenings, after the day's excavation was done, some of the team would sit together by the low light of lanterns and speculate quietly. Not in the language of academic papers, but in the open, wondering way that people speak when the unknown presses close. What if this was not an offshoot, but a wholly separate branch of human civilization, one that flourished in parallel to others, never touching them, until both were gone? What if, in some deep layer of the past, there were more such branches, now gone so completely that the earth remembers them only in the bones of cities like this? We like to think of ourselves as the latest point in a single unbroken chain of advancement. But what if we are only one of many chains, and the others have already rusted away, their links scattered and buried? The city gave no answers. No inscriptions offered names of kings or gods. No monuments declared victories or recorded harvests. The people who lived here had left no clear record of themselves, as though their identity had been deliberately withheld, or perhaps simply never expressed in ways we would recognize. The realization sank in slowly. This was not just a lost city. This was the ghost of a people, erased so completely that until now, even the Earth's surface gave no hint of their existence. It is difficult to hold the weight of such erasure in the mind. We can understand the disappearance of a building, or a family, or even a small village. But an entire civilization, with its own language, its own customs, its own place in the world, gone without trace? It challenges the very idea of permanence. And yet, here they were, present in the absence, speaking in the silence, their story carried not in words but in the cold endurance of stone. There is a strange comfort in that. For while names fade, while memory can be lost, there are moments when the earth decides to return what was hidden. And in that return, even without a name, the builders are no longer entirely gone. They are here, in the patterns of the walls, in the choice of materials, in the silent geometry of their streets. They are here in the mystery that now pulls strangers from across the world to kneel in their dust and wonder. A civilization without a name is still a civilization, and a story without a title is still a story worth telling. If the language was the voice of the city, then its water was its pulse. It ran through channels, cisterns, and hidden conduits, unseen but vital, threading through the stone like veins through flesh. The first clue came not from the surface, but from beneath a crumbled stairwell, where an archaeologist's boot struck hollow ground. Clearing the debris revealed a shaft, narrow and lined with fitted stone blocks so precisely placed that, even after thousands of years, water still pooled at the bottom. It was not rainwater. Tests showed it had been drawn from a source deep below, free from the contaminants of the surface. The stone lining kept it cool, drinkable, protected from evaporation in a land where summer sun could strip the earth bare. As excavation deepened, more of these waterworks emerged. There were narrow channels carved into bedrock, some barely wide enough to fit a hand, others broad enough for a person to crawl through. There were reservoirs built beneath public spaces, their walls plastered smooth with a lime mixture that resisted seepage. This was not the work of desperate improvisation. It was the product of careful planning, of mathematical knowledge, of a culture that understood not just the value of water, but the artistry of moving it. Even now, after centuries of dust and silence, you could sense the intention in its design. Each slope was calculated for just the right flow, each joint sealed as though the builders feared even a single drop might escape. There is something deeply human about such precision. Water has always been more than survival. It is community, ritual, and rhythm. Civilizations rise where water is reliable, and they fade when it fails. In this city, it seemed water was not just a resource, but a lifeline carefully woven into every part of life. A channel might lead not only to a cistern, but to a courtyard fountain, a place where people might gather, speak, share the coolness in the heat of day. And yet, this system was strange. There were no aqueducts bringing water from distant rivers, no grand canals visible on the surface. The entire network seemed hidden, running beneath the city like a secret. Why conceal it? Some archaeologists wondered if it was defensive, a way to protect the city's lifeblood from invaders or drought. Others thought it might be ritual, that water drawn from deep within the earth had a sacred quality and could not be exposed to the open air. In certain chambers, water still trickled faintly, as though the city had never entirely died. Standing in those underground spaces, the sound was startling, a soft, persistent whisper in a place otherwise thick with silence. Water has a way of carrying memory. It moves through the same paths for centuries, polishing stone with slow insistence. Perhaps these channels still remember the hands that carved them, the intentions that shaped their course. The bones of the city, its streets, its walls, tell us where life happened, but its water tells us how life endured. One chamber, in particular, became a focus of fascination. It was circular, roofed with a dome of fitted stone, with a pool at its center fed by 3 narrow channels. The acoustics made every drop of water ring like a small bell. Some believed it was purely functional, a central cistern for distribution. Others suspected it had a ceremonial purpose, perhaps tied to the unseen language inscribed on stones above ground. A few symbols carved near the chamber's entrance seemed to reference water, repeated flowing lines almost like ripples. Whether they were words, numbers, or blessings, no one could say. It is easy to forget, in an age of endless taps and pumps, that water once arrived only where humans labored to bring it, that every cup was connected to a story of engineering, of protection, of reverence. In this city, long gone and unnamed, water was not merely carried, it was guarded. The design of the system suggested that the builders anticipated centuries of use, perhaps believing their descendants would walk the same streets, draw from the same wells, listen to the same echoing trickle in the dark. But no one walks here now. The water still flows in places, but there is no hand to catch it. It runs into empty channels, past walls that no longer hear laughter, past fountains that will never again see sunlight. And yet, the water remains, flowing through the bones of the city, as though unwilling to acknowledge that the heart above has stopped beating. The first suspicion came from the color. Among the pale limestone and sun-baked clay bricks, there were blocks that gleamed with a darker, almost metallic sheen. They caught the light in ways the surrounding stone never did, like fragments of another world that had somehow fallen into this one. Geologists assumed they would be local, perhaps a different layer of rock from nearby hills. But when the samples were tested, the results were unexpected. The darker blocks were composed of minerals found not within hundreds of kilometers, but thousands. Some matched quarries known from regions across the sea in lands this civilization was never thought to have reached. Others contained crystalline structures formed under pressure so extreme they are typically found deep in the Earth's crust, far below anything ancient quarrying could have accessed. And yet here they were, cut into perfect rectangular blocks, their surfaces smoothed with precision, their edges aligned with the city's geometry as though they had always belonged. It raised an immediate question: how did they arrive? There are only a few possibilities, and each one is improbable. They could have been transported, but that would require ships, beasts of burden, and organized labor on a scale we do not associate with a city of this age or location. They could have been traded, but there is no record, no matching artifacts, no sign of a vast network of exchange. Or, more unsettlingly, they could have been shaped here from materials that originated in an entirely different geological context, which would imply a level of geological knowledge and extraction technology far beyond the expected timeline. Some of these stones were heavier than modern construction cranes could easily lift. Their presence hinted at tools we have not yet found, or perhaps tools that did not survive the centuries. It is not uncommon for archaeologists to encounter a single out-of-place object, but here the anomaly was systematic. Entire walls were built from the impossible stones. Whole structures were framed in material that could not be sourced locally. This was not an accident of a single shipment or an isolated treasure. This was part of the city's identity. In one case, a foundation block was found to contain traces of a mineral typically associated with volcanic activity, but the nearest volcanic region lay over 1,000 kilometers away. Even stranger, the mineral sample had microfractures that suggested it had once been under immense heat and pressure, then cooled quickly, almost as if it had been artificially forged. When word of these findings spread, some researchers proposed ancient trade networks far more complex than we currently map. Others considered the possibility of lost geological processes or now-vanished land routes. But there was a quiet minority who leaned towards something far stranger, that these stones were chosen not for availability, but for meaning. Cultures often assign symbolic value to certain materials. A king's tomb might be lined with rare jade because it is green like the promise of eternal life. A temple might be built of marble because its brightness reflects the sun god's purity. Perhaps these stones, gathered from impossible distances, were not simply for strength, but for the story they carried. The problem with that explanation was scale. This was not one symbolic altar or ceremonial chamber. This was citywide. If the material had meaning, then the entire city was steeped in that meaning. Every doorway, every stair, every plaza would have spoken it, in a language now silent. The mystery deepened when archaeologists discovered a section of collapsed building where the stones had fractured in ways unlike typical masonry. The break patterns revealed internal layers, thin striations of different minerals, almost like the pages of a book pressed into rock. Under a microscope, these layers appeared to hold trapped pockets of air and water from the time of their formation, tiny bubbles of a world millions of years older than the city itself. Some of the stones even contained fossilized microorganisms from regions far away, suggesting not only a geographic displacement, but a shift in ecosystems. It was as if pieces of other lands had been transplanted here, intentionally, as though the builders had been gathering fragments of the Earth's body to assemble into something new. Standing among these structures today, you feel the weight of those stones in a way that is not entirely physical. They are heavier with questions than with mass. They belong and do not belong at the same time. Geology is usually a science of patience. Rocks move slowly. Continents drift over millions of years. But here was a puzzle that seemed to have happened quickly, within the span of a civilization's memory. This means either our understanding of the city's capacity is wrong, or our understanding of the stone's journey is incomplete. If the city's people went to such effort to bring these materials here, what were they building toward? Was it purely an act of architecture, or was it also an act of cosmology, arranging matter itself to reflect a vision of the world? In myths from many cultures, the gods create the first cities from the bones of mountains, the teeth of giants, or the stones of the underworld. Could this city be echoing such a belief, not in story, but in stone? Whatever the truth, the stones remain where they have always been, silent, unmoving, and yet stubbornly defiant of the map. They are proof of something. We just do not yet know what. The discovery came in fragments, brittle and yellowed, as if the paper itself had inhaled centuries of dust and silence. It was a tablet, not a map in the modern sense, but a carved stone sheet, delicate lines etched into its surface with the care of an artist and the precision of a surveyor. At first, it seemed simple, a diagram, perhaps, of the city's layout. But the more carefully it was examined, the more impossible its reach became clear. Some symbols corresponded to features far beyond the city: rivers, coastlines, mountain ranges. Entire continents appeared drawn with a precision that defied the limits of observation for any civilization of its time. There were no compasses accurate enough, no telescopes, no known overland knowledge that could account for such detail. Yet the carvings matched the modern geography astonishingly well. The tablet became a key to understanding the builders' ambitions, or their awareness. They were not merely constructing a city. They were referencing a world they were never supposed to know. Cartographers, linguists, and historians studied it together. They measured the lines, compared them with modern maps, traced the curves of coastlines, the bends of rivers. Every test reinforced the anomaly. The city's creators had either traveled farther than we imagined, observed from impossible heights, or possessed knowledge lost to time. Some argued the tablet was symbolic rather than literal, a conceptual map, a vision rather than a record. But the precision of distances and angles suggested it was not imagination alone. There was intent, calculation, exactitude. Even more astonishing, some features depicted places that, at the time of the city's construction, would have been inaccessible: glaciers, deserts, mountain passes that did not exist in the present configuration of the landscape. It was as if the map contained knowledge of future geography or preserved traces of vanished landscapes. This realization unsettled everyone who studied it. Maps are supposed to guide us. They tell us where we are, where we have been, and sometimes where we might go. But this map suggested a civilization that could see beyond the boundaries of its own existence. There were etched symbols near certain mountains, small spirals, stars, or marks resembling constellations. Some researchers speculated these could indicate observational points, places where the builders may have measured distance or direction, combining the heavens with the earth. It became clear that the city was not just an isolated achievement. It was connected, intellectually, conceptually, perhaps spiritually, to the wider world, even if no evidence of travel had been found. The lines of the tablet also included features now hidden or lost: rivers that no longer run, valleys filled with sediment, coasts drowned beneath the sea. The map preserved a memory of the earth itself, a snapshot of a world that was, and in some ways remains, buried beneath time. And yet, there was silence where there should have been explanation. No accompanying text, no key, no legend. The tablet told a story, but in a language we cannot fully read. It offered perspective, but withheld meaning. This absence forced the mind to linger on questions. Did the builders intend for this map to survive? Or was it merely a tool, buried alongside their city, awaiting discovery centuries later? Were they the architects of knowledge, leaving behind a whisper for future generations? Some wondered if the map was more than a record, perhaps a guide for thought rather than for travel. A way to order the universe on stone, to organize space and imagination at once, to create a city that reflected not only the physical world but the possibilities of understanding. In that sense, the city becomes more than architecture and the map more than geography. Together, they hint at an intellect reaching for universals, a curiosity not constrained by boundaries. Holding the tablet, one senses a quiet insistence, a voice from the past urging recognition. The lines are deliberate, the forms intentional. The city itself is not isolated. It is part of a network, seen and planned in ways that defy our assumptions about the limits of ancient knowledge. And still, there is ambiguity. We do not know whether this civilization mapped the world for survival, for ritual, or for understanding itself. Perhaps all three. Perhaps something beyond our comprehension. In the slow, measured examination of the tablet, the city opens further, not just as a collection of stones and water channels, but as a mind in dialogue with the planet, drawing in the contours of mountains, the sweep of rivers, the expanse of oceans, and translating it into a language only they understood. The map that should not exist reminds us of our own limits, our assumptions about what is possible, and the humility required to encounter the past. It suggests that somewhere, deep in the dust and silence, there is knowledge that waits not for excavation alone, but for imagination, for the willingness to listen to what has no name, to follow the lines where they lead, and to consider that the world is wider and stranger than we have ever allowed ourselves to see. Even in silence, the city spoke, not in language, not in stone, not in the impossible map, but in the soil itself. The dirt beneath the ruins held impressions of footsteps, the faint depressions of where walls once stood, where hearths burned, where hands had pressed, shaped, and kneaded. Archaeologists have a term for such subtle traces: microstratigraphy. Every layer of soil is a record, a diary of human activity written in dust, sediment, and organic matter. Here, the diary was intricate, delicate, almost poetic. A shallow groove in the clay suggested the passage of a cart or sled, perhaps used to transport water or stone. Tiny depressions, barely visible, marked where children may have played or where small animals were tethered. Burn marks hinted at cooking fires, feasts, or ritual offerings. These were not monumental discoveries, not artifacts displayed in glass cases, but they were profound. They connected the present with the intimate past of people who left no name, no written word, no herald of their existence. Every layer was a whisper. A scattering of seeds in one corner suggested gardens cultivated with patience and care. Broken pottery shards told stories of meals shared, of daily life unfolding in rhythms lost to memory. Tiny fragments of bone hinted at diet, at sustenance, at the routines of living beings who once occupied this space. In some areas, patterns suggested deliberate arrangement, circles of stone that may have been altars or gathering places, rows of post holes marking structures we can no longer fully reconstruct. The echoes are faint but intentional. Life existed here in ways we recognize, even without names. There were moments when the soil seemed almost sentient in its memory. A hand brushing away layers of dust could reveal impressions left centuries ago. The curve of a foot, a fingertip pressed into wet clay, a faint indentation of a tool. One could feel, almost physically, the act of existence reaching out across time. It is a humbling experience to recognize the ordinary amid the extraordinary. For the city's walls, stones, and maps dazzle with their impossible features. Yet the most human, most relatable aspects are found not in the grand or the impossible, but in the small, everyday acts preserved by the earth itself. There is a rhythm in the soil, a pulse that carries the footsteps, the laughter, the labor, and the care of those who lived and moved here. In its quiet persistence, it narrates a story beyond words, a story of continuity, of attention, of life sustained in patterns, routines, and rituals. And rituals were everywhere, hidden in plain sight. Tiny pits filled with ash, positioned deliberately, suggested offerings, perhaps to a deity, perhaps to ancestors, or perhaps simply to mark a moment of awareness and gratitude. The placement of stones in certain areas, seemingly random, became deliberate when seen from above, forming lines and curves that echoed patterns in the city's architecture. There was repetition, yes, but not monotony. The repetition carried meaning, as rituals often do. It connected humans to cycles of nature, the rising sun, the passing of seasons, the flow of water through their carefully engineered channels. Even in a city without a name, without known language, without surviving records of thought, these acts reached across time, conveying intention, awareness, and care. It was in this soil that the city truly became alive to those who studied it. Stone can endure, maps can survive, water can flow, but the soil remembers the touch of hands and the weight of life in a way that transcends monuments. The people were gone, but the impressions of their presence were etched into the earth like a soft, persistent hum, a vibration of existence, faint but undeniable. Archaeologists sometimes paused, brushing dust from tiny features that others might overlook. They would hold their breath as if the soil itself were breathing, sensing the reverence for this hidden testimony of daily life. And in those moments, the nameless civilization revealed something profound, that even in the absence of names, even in the erasure of language, even in the vanishing of their physical forms, life imprints itself in enduring ways. The city's story was not told only in monuments, maps, or impossible stones. It was told in the quiet, invisible ways of survival and adaptation, in the repetition of ordinary acts made extraordinary by their preservation. The soil became a medium of continuity, a bridge between past and present. Every careful sweep of a brush, every careful removal of sediment, was an act of listening. And in listening, the researchers began to understand, not fully, not literally, but emotionally, the pulse of human existence that had once thrived here. This was the heartbeat of the city, subtle, persistent, intimate, and enduring. It was a rhythm that carried the nameless people across centuries, whispering to those who would come after that they had existed, that they had lived, and that, even in silence, they had made their presence known. The city was not just built. It was composed like a symphony of stone and space, designed to catch and reflect more than light. Its geometry suggested thoughtfulness beyond necessity, as if the builders sought not only to shelter or defend, but to communicate through the rhythm of walls, the alignment of plazas, the play of sun and shadow. Some courtyards were shallow and square, others circular and concentric, each opening onto narrow corridors or larger halls in patterns that repeated, but never exactly. The repetition was deliberate, a motif, a meditation, an echo of symmetry interrupted by subtle variation. The stones themselves seemed chosen for their reflectivity. Some walls, once plastered and polished, would have caught sunlight at particular angles, casting brilliance across interior spaces. Others, darker and denser, absorbed light and created depth, shadowed spaces that invited pause and reflection. It was as if the city itself had been designed to mirror the mind. There were spaces that calmed, spaces that inspired awe, spaces that seemed to ask the observer to slow down, to notice, to breathe. The arrangement of passages encouraged wandering, but not aimless wandering, a journey that was both physical and contemplative. Some researchers began to call it a city of mirrors, not because of literal reflective surfaces, but because of the way its architecture reflected ideas, patterns, and perhaps even human consciousness. Each angle of stone suggested observation. Each threshold invited consideration. Each alignment encouraged reflection on space, time, and self. In certain plazas, stones were arranged so that the rising sun on the equinox would illuminate a single central point, creating a glowing column of light that shifted with the day. Other alignments suggested a knowledge of astronomy, yet the placements were subtle, almost secret, visible only to those who noticed, who paused, who understood the language of the city itself. It is easy to imagine the builders moving through these spaces, aware of the way light traveled across their walls, how echoes carried, how shadows lengthened and contracted. Their lives were structured around these rhythms, their experiences shaped by the careful orchestration of geometry and space. There is an intimacy in such design, a city that mirrors not only the physical environment, but also the internal world of those who move through it, creates a dialogue across centuries. To walk these streets is to become part of the reflection, to inhabit the thought of the builders without ever meeting them. Even the smaller details were deliberate. Steps were measured to match the stride of the human body. Thresholds were proportioned to invite attention, and walls rose to heights that balanced enclosure with openness. There is a quiet poetry in such precision, an understanding that architecture is not only shelter, but conversation, a medium for thought that endures longer than speech. Some spaces were intentionally disorienting. Narrow corridors opened onto vast chambers. Angles shifted unexpectedly, forcing the walker to recalibrate their perception. These subtle manipulations of geometry suggested a culture that valued awareness, presence, and engagement with the environment, not mere passage through it. Water amplified this effect. Reflecting pools caught the sky and mirrored the surrounding architecture. Fountains, channels, and cisterns created moving reflections, rippling across walls and floors, responding to light and wind. The city's pulse of water became part of the mirror, blending the tangible and the ephemeral into a single experience. The more time one spent in the city, the more the effect became apparent. It was not designed solely for utility, not solely for defense, not solely for ceremony. It was, in its entirety, an environment of thought, an attempt to structure space in such a way that the human mind itself might be reflected back, studied, appreciated, and perhaps even elevated. And yet, the builders remain nameless. No inscription explains why the courtyards aligned so. No text reveals the intent behind the interplay of shadow and light. No document describes the intended experience of wandering these halls. The city mirrors not only the mind of its inhabitants, but also the mind of the observer across millennia, inviting interpretation, imagination, and meditation. Walking these spaces, one cannot help but slow down. Every step becomes an observation, every pause a reflection, every glance a dialogue with the past. The architecture itself insists on mindfulness, attention, and an appreciation of the ephemeral beauty that light and shadow, form and function, can create together. In the quiet moments, when the sun passes overhead and the wind moves through empty halls, the city seems alive with memory. Stones reflect not only light, but the intent, care, and consciousness of those who arranged them. The echoes of human presence linger, subtle but insistent, like a heartbeat within the walls. It is in these reflective spaces that the city's essence becomes most apparent. Not in maps, not in language, not in impossible stones, but in the poetry of space itself, in the way the physical world can be crafted to engage the mind, to mirror thought, to create continuity between the living and the long departed. A city of mirrors is a city that endures beyond the ordinary measures of time. Even when names are lost, languages vanish, and civilizations fade, it remains silent, luminous, meditative, and waiting for those who can slow down enough to see themselves reflected within it. In every city, doors are practical. They close and open, divide and protect. But here, in this nameless city, doors seemed to breathe. The entrances were never arbitrary. They framed light and shadow, movement and pause. Some were low, forcing a bow, a quiet gesture of respect or reflection. Others were grand and tall, inviting awe, marking thresholds not just of space, but of consciousness. Passing through a doorway in this city was never neutral. It was an act of awareness. Every threshold seemed to measure the pace of those who crossed it, to guide the body and mind subtly, almost imperceptibly. One could feel a gentle insistence. Slow, observe, consider. Thresholds were aligned with courtyards, plazas, and halls in ways that amplified perception. A narrow doorway might open into a wide hall, making space feel larger, the air fresher, the mind more alert. A slightly recessed entrance allowed light to pool in the interior before it touched the observer, creating anticipation, a moment of meditation before encountering the room beyond. Doors were not simply openings, they were invitations. They choreographed attention, guided movement, and shaped emotional experience. The city itself seemed aware that how one enters a space changes everything that follows. Some passageways were deliberate puzzles, angled doorways, offset thresholds, or unexpected turns demanded presence. They disrupted habitual walking, made the observer notice their own motion, the rhythm of their breath, the weight of their body. In these subtle ways, architecture became a teacher. The city itself instructed its inhabitants in mindfulness, in patience, in the art of perception. The material of each doorway mattered. Some were framed in lighter stone that reflected sun and heat, giving a welcoming glow. Others were heavier, darker, grounding. The contrast between thresholds created a rhythm of movement, a dialogue between light and shadow, speed and stillness, anticipation and release. In one sequence, a corridor led to 3 successive doors, each smaller than the last, each with its own angle to the sun. Passing through them, a visitor would experience a gradual compression of space, a subtle contraction of time, a quiet focusing of attention, a ritual enacted through stone alone. The city seemed to breathe with these openings. Each door exhaled light, inhaled shadow. Each threshold expanded awareness, held stillness, then released it. To move through the city was to enter a continuous exchange, the body responding to architecture, the mind engaging in dialogue with absence, presence, and anticipation. Some thresholds hinted at ritual or ceremony. Certain doors led only to interior chambers, narrow and private, their placement and proportion suggesting meditation or introspection. Others opened onto public plazas, inviting interaction, gathering, and reflection. The alternation between private and communal, intimate and monumental, echoed through the city's rhythm like the cadence of breath itself. Even in decay, the breath remains. Collapsed walls and missing stones cannot erase the intent behind these passages. A careful observer still senses the choreography of movement, the guidance of attention, the ebb and flow of emotional resonance encoded in the city's design. There is an intimacy in this understanding. It is more than engineering. It is philosophy embedded in space. Every threshold is a subtle teacher of awareness. Every doorway, a mediator between interior and exterior, between individual and collective experience, between past and present. Perhaps this is why the city endures in such a quiet way. Its stones do not boast, its walls do not shout. But the thresholds, the very act of crossing from one space to another, carry memory, intention, and reflection. The city remains alive not through monuments alone, but through the choreography of experience preserved in its architecture. Walking through these doors even now, one can feel the pulse of those who designed them. The builders anticipated the way humans perceive, the way attention shifts, the way emotion flows. They encoded lessons not in text but in space, proportion, and movement. And so, the breadth of doors continues. It flows through corridors and plazas, rises from thresholds into courtyards, circulates between interiors and the open sky. It teaches patience, observation, presence. It whispers the intent of a civilization that, though nameless, understood the subtle power of movement and awareness, the poetry of crossing from one world into another with intention. In this city, the simple act of passing through a doorway becomes a meditation, a recognition that even in the ordinary, a door, a threshold, a corridor, meaning can endure across centuries, carrying the silent presence of those who shaped the world long before us. The city breathed with light and shadow. It was not merely the illumination of sun or the gloom of shelter, but a deliberate conversation written in stone and space. Every wall, every pillar, every corridor seemed to consider how light would travel, how darkness would gather, how perception would be guided without a word, without a command. Shadows moved slowly through the streets as the sun rose and fell, tracing the geometry of the city like invisible ink. They fell across plazas, intersected columns, slipped into niches and corners, forming patterns that shifted with the hour. Each movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet imbued with intention. In the courtyards, shadows cast by walls and overhangs created rectangles and circles of darkness that touched the earth like reminders. They invited pause, reflection, a slowing of the body to match the city's rhythm. One could feel the weight of time in these spaces, centuries folding into moments, light and shadow intersecting across millennia. Some chambers were deliberately designed for shadow. The entrances were positioned to allow a narrow beam of sunlight to enter at a specific angle, illuminating only a small area of the room. At other times, the interior remained in near-complete darkness, a quiet void for contemplation or ritual. The builders understood that absence of light can be as expressive as its presence. Shadow also carried memory. On floors and walls, faint traces of patterns could be discerned where paint or plaster had faded, marking the places where objects once stood or where ceremonies were enacted. In the interplay of darkness and illumination, the ghostly outlines of life remained, a testament to the people who had once moved through these spaces with intention. In long corridors, shadow elongated, stretching the perception of distance, slowing movement, and prompting awareness of each step. Narrow passageways alternated with wider halls, guiding not just bodies but attention. Every shift in illumination was a subtle cue, orchestrating how one experienced space, how one felt within it. The city's water contributed to this choreography. Pools, fountains, and channels reflected light onto ceilings and walls, creating transient shadows that danced with the movement of air and ripples. In some chambers, a single drop of water falling into a pool created concentric rings that fragmented the reflected sunlight, painting moving mosaics across stone surfaces. The effect was hypnotic, meditative, almost alive, as if the city itself was breathing through shadow. There were places where shadows seemed to deepen with secrecy, alcoves tucked into corners, partially hidden niches, stairways that spiraled into darkness. These spaces suggested privacy, introspection, and perhaps ritual. The absence of light invited focus, attention inward, a quiet conversation between the mind and the subtle architecture surrounding it. It is impossible to separate the city from its shadows. Stone alone is mute, light alone is fleeting, but shadow carries the weight of both. It anchors the ephemeral to the permanent, the invisible to the visible, the passing of hours to the persistence of stone. In this city, shadows are not accidents of construction. They are deliberate, essential, alive with intention. Even the smallest shadow could evoke awareness of the absent. A line of darkness across a floor might mark the site of a bench, a hearth, or a ceremonial object. The shifting patterns of light and shadow preserved a rhythm of life without preserving its inhabitants. They speak quietly of the presence of bodies that once moved here, of the careful choreography of daily life, of the unrecorded rituals that filled the hours. The silence of shadows is profound. It is not emptiness. It is attention, stillness, reflection. It reminds the observer that presence can be communicated without sound, without text, without image. The city teaches that silence itself is meaningful, that absence can contain as much intention as presence, and that observation is a form of connection. Walking through the shaded corridors, one senses the cadence of the builder's thought. The city orchestrated not only movement but awareness, not only utility but perception, not only structure but contemplation. Shadows became guides, teachers, companions in a dialogue that has lasted centuries. Even in decay, the silence persists. Collapsed walls, missing stones, and weathered surfaces cannot erase the deliberate interplay of darkness and light. One can still experience the intentional pauses, the quiet nudges, the meditative spaces where the city's soul lingers. In the presence of shadow, the city reveals something essential. Life, thought, and intention endure not only through monuments and maps, but through subtle, ephemeral traces, the careful orchestration of absence as well as presence. The builders understood that the quiet, almost imperceptible, shapes consciousness as profoundly as the grand and monumental. In this city, shadow is memory. It is rhythm, meditation, and continuity. It teaches patience, attention, and humility. And it reminds us that even when names are lost, languages disappear, and civilizations vanish, the subtle architecture of thought can endure, whispering across centuries to those who pause, observe, and reflect. Beyond the stones, beyond the water, beyond the shadow, there was pattern. Not immediately obvious, not shouted through inscriptions or monuments, but woven into the city like a quiet heartbeat, subtle and deliberate. These were the unseen patterns, alignments, repetitions, and proportions that suggested a civilization attuned to mathematics, philosophy, and the cosmos. From the surface, the city might appear irregular. Streets bend unexpectedly, plazas vary in shape, and walls shift in ways that seem accidental. Yet, as the archaeologists began mapping the site in detail, a deeper logic emerged. Angles repeated across structures, ratios appeared consistent, and distances echoed measurements known only to those who understood proportion at a profound level. Some alignments corresponded to celestial events. A particular tower, when viewed from a distant plaza, perfectly framed the rising sun on the solstice. In other cases, the angles of corridors matched the positions of stars at certain times of the year. These were not casual coincidences. They were evidence of careful observation of time, measured and recorded in the geometry of stone. The repetition of shapes, circles within squares, spirals echoing in staircases, triangles nested within courtyards, suggested a symbolic as well as practical intent. These were not merely aesthetic choices. They spoke to a philosophy of order, balance, and harmony, a worldview that sought to encode understanding of the natural and cosmic order into the very fabric of the city. Even the smallest elements revealed care. Tiles were laid in sequences that echoed patterns in nature, fractal-like repetitions, spirals reminiscent of shells or galaxies, and grids aligned with subtle asymmetry that created a sense of dynamic equilibrium. Every surface, every threshold, seemed to participate in a larger unseen dialogue. It became evident that the city's builders thought in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They considered space, time, light, water, and movement as interwoven. Their work was not merely functional. It was conceptual, philosophical, meditative. Each pattern, each alignment, each repetition carried meaning that extended beyond the immediate, reaching toward understanding of the cosmos itself. Some scholars began to speculate that the city functioned as a kind of living diagram, a manifestation of knowledge encoded in physical form. Walls, channels, thresholds, and courtyards were not isolated. They were part of a unified system where the measurement of distance, the flow of water, and the play of shadow were all part of a single design principle. And yet, these patterns were hidden. They were subtle enough to be overlooked by casual observation, detectable only through patient study and reflection. Perhaps this was intentional. Perhaps the builders wished knowledge to reveal itself only to those willing to slow down, to notice, to engage thoughtfully with the environment. Even the placement of doors, windows, and openings followed hidden logics. Some aligned with neighboring structures, some with distant hills or rivers, some with points in the night sky. The city was a lattice of intention, a network of observations and measurements that bound the human scale to the cosmic, the temporal to the eternal. It is tempting to call these patterns mathematical, astronomical, or philosophical. And yet, they were more than each of these alone. They were poetry made tangible, thought made visible, consciousness etched into stone. Walking through these hidden geometries, one becomes aware not only of the city's builders, but of the rhythm of thought itself, a rhythm preserved across centuries, echoing in space and proportion. The patterns also hinted at ritual. Certain courtyards aligned with water channels and doors in ways that suggested processions, gatherings, or ceremonies timed with celestial cycles. Some researchers suggested the city functioned not only as a place to live, but as a place to experience the cosmos, a way to embody philosophy, astronomy, and human intention simultaneously. Even in decay, these patterns persist. Collapsed walls do not erase alignment. Faded tiles do not remove proportion. The geometry of thought remains like a quiet music, a rhythm that can still be discerned by careful attention. The city continues to teach, even in silence. In observing these unseen patterns, one begins to sense the scope of the civilization's understanding. They recognize that life is lived not in isolation, but in relation to the sun, the stars, the earth, and to one another. The city's design, invisible to those who rush, was a meditation on connection, balance, and the harmonies that bind the human to the cosmos. It is here, in the quiet awareness of hidden alignment, that the city speaks most eloquently, not through names, not through inscriptions, not through recorded language, but through intention itself. The patterns are a legacy of thought, preserved in proportion, rhythm, and geometry, a reflection of minds that understood that understanding is not merely learned, but experienced. The unseen patterns whisper across time. Notice, pause, reflect. Attend to the hidden harmonies of the world. The city, though silent, remains a teacher, its lessons embedded in stone, shadow, and space, awaiting the attentive mind. The city moves even when it is still. Not in the obvious sense, not in the clatter of feet or the hum of voices, but in the imprint of human presence, a pulse encoded in stone, soil, and water. Every corridor, staircase, and courtyard carries subtle evidence of the lives that once flowed through them. Footfalls left faint depressions in worn thresholds. Repeated paths formed shallow grooves in clay and stone, tracing the rhythm of labor, leisure, and ritual. The traces are silent, yet insistently alive, like a heartbeat embedded in the city itself. Some sequences of movement are obvious only in aggregate. A plaza shows wherein a pattern suggesting gatherings at certain points, perhaps marketplaces, ceremonies, or daily assemblies. Narrow corridors leading from these plazas suggest controlled flow, guiding bodies toward specific locations, shaping interaction without instruction, orchestrating social rhythm in stone and space. Labor left its own fingerprints. Quarry marks on stone blocks, impressions of tools, and fragments of construction debris reveal the process of building at scales both monumental and minute. These traces are the pulse of human effort, recorded not in words but in the physical dialogue between material and hand. Even domestic life can be glimpsed. Hearths once fueled the city's quiet warmth. Post holes mark the positions of dwellings. Small depressions hint at storage pits, kitchens, or benches. The repetition of these spaces across neighborhoods suggests shared patterns of daily living, a rhythm of activity that repeated from sunrise to sunset, from season to season. The city's watercourses carry echoes of human interaction as well. Channels were not purely functional. Their courses show adjustments, repairs, and modifications that reveal attention to care, to efficiency, and to coexistence. Water flowed through the city, shaping movement, marking boundaries, and connecting spaces. Its pulse mirrors the rhythm of those who tended it, the invisible lives it supported, the routines it sustained. There is poetry in these patterns of presence. Even absent, the people are perceptible. They are felt in the repetition of wear on stone steps, in the subtle undulations of paths, in the careful construction of thresholds. Every trace communicates rhythm, labor, leisure, ceremony, contemplation. The city itself becomes a recorder of human experience, a silent archive of living energy. Some traces are almost imperceptible. Small scratches on walls suggest the passage of hands. Faint impressions in floors mark where feet pause to observe, listen, or engage in ritual. Tiny remnants of organic material, seeds, fragments of bone, or ash speak of sustenance, diet, and attention to the environment. Each detail is a heartbeat contributing to the collective pulse of the city's life. Movement and intention were entwined. Certain pathways encourage a slow pace, others, a careful ascent or descent. Steps were proportioned to human stride. Corridors guided sight lines, attention, and anticipation. The city choreographs experience as much as it shelters existence. It encodes the rhythm of life in its very structure, ensuring that every crossing, every ascent, every pause resonates with intention. Rituals emerge subtly in these traces. Group gatherings, private contemplations, and communal observances left faint yet consistent marks across space. Stone alignments, thresholds, and plazas suggest processions and ceremonies timed to cycles of sun, water, or season. The pulse of invisible lives is inseparable from the rhythm of the city itself. Time here is not measured in hours or days, but in repetition, motion, and flow. The pulse of the city persists even as its inhabitants vanish. Stone remembers the weight of bodies. Soil preserves the trace of hands. Water channels echo the care of those who maintained them. The rhythm of living continues, though quiet, subdued, and almost imperceptible. The city teaches that life is more than objects and structures. It exists in movement, in patterns, in intention, and in interaction. Even centuries later, when names are forgotten, when language disappears, when walls crumble, the pulse of human experience remains embedded in every step, every threshold, every courtyard. Walking through these spaces, one becomes aware of being part of this pulse. The rhythm of invisible lives merges with the observer's own breath and motion. It is subtle, meditative, almost hypnotic, and yet profoundly grounding. A reminder that life endures in ways beyond documentation, beyond narrative, and beyond memory. The city's pulse is ultimately a meditation. It is a record of patience, attention, care, and continuity. It is a rhythm that invites recognition, slowing, and reflection. It whispers of a civilization that understood that even invisible acts, labor, walking, gathering, observing, carry significance and leave enduring traces. In this rhythm, the city becomes alive again. The invisible lives are present not as ghostly apparitions, but as the echo of human intention, a heartbeat flowing through space and time. Each observer who walks these paths joins the pulse, connecting past and present, experience and perception, life and memory. It is in this awareness that the city's deepest secret is revealed, that life, no matter how fleeting or unnoticed, imprints itself upon the world. That every hand, every footfall, every breath of human existence can endure in silence, waiting for someone patient enough to feel it. Every city leaves a mark. Some shout across time with monuments and inscriptions. Others vanish quietly, leaving only the faintest traces of life, movement, and thought. This city, hidden where no civilization should exist, belongs to the latter, subtle, elusive, and yet profoundly present. Its whispers are carried in stone, soil, shadow, and water. They are not heard with ears but felt, with attention, with imagination, with a patient willingness to perceive the past without needing to name it. The city speaks softly, insistently, urging those who enter to slow down, to breathe, and to notice. The last whisper is not a sound, but a rhythm. The rhythm of human intention embedded in every layer of construction, every threshold crossed, every courtyard navigated. It is the pulse of lives lived without records, yet preserved in micro-traces, proportions, and alignments. This is a city that communicates across centuries, not through language, but through experience. Even the impossible aspects of the city, the map that should not exist, the geometries aligned with stars, the hidden patterns, participate in this whisper. They are part of a dialogue that transcends conventional understanding, a conversation between human curiosity, perception, and the inexhaustible mysteries of the world. The whisper is amplified by silence. Without voices, without crowds, without ceremony, every detail speaks more clearly. A fallen stone, a shadowed corridor, a faint groove in the soil. Each element becomes a syllable in a language of awareness, attention, and reflection. The city teaches patience and invites meditation, reminding observers that meaning often resides in the quiet spaces between events. Time itself seems different here. The city folds centuries into moments. A single step along a worn pathway connects the present to generations long gone. The rhythm of invisible lives merges with that of the observer, creating a continuity that transcends absence. Each motion, each breath becomes part of a living archive, a record of human presence encoded in space. There is a paradox in the city's whisper. It is both intimate and cosmic. The smallest details, the curve of a doorway, the worn edge of a step, the placement of water channels, speak of individual care, of the ordinary acts of life. Yet the alignment of courtyards, the hidden geometries, and the celestial correspondences suggest an awareness that stretches beyond the personal, connecting the inhabitants to the broader rhythms of the natural world and the cosmos. This duality is the essence of the city's final message. Life, even when unnoticed, is meaningful. Labor, observation, ritual, and attention leave traces that endure. And these traces, subtle as they may be, are sufficient to communicate presence, intention, and curiosity across centuries. The city whispers not because it must, but because it can, and because those willing to listen will feel its enduring resonance. There is also a sense of humility in this whisper. The city does not proclaim mastery or conquest. It does not boast of its builder's skill. Instead, it invites reflection, encouraging visitors to consider their own place within the vast scales of time, space, and human possibility. The whisper teaches that observation, contemplation, and awareness are as important as action, that subtlety and patience are enduring forms of legacy. Even now, in decay, the city continues to communicate. Collapsed walls and missing stones do not erase intention. Worn paths and scattered artifacts continue to record the pulse of lives once lived. Light and shadow continue to shape perception. Water continues to move through channels, reflecting the sky and carrying the rhythm of the city's design. In every moment, the whisper persists. The city's final message is one of connection. It connects past and present, visible and invisible, individual and collective, human and cosmic. It reminds us that even in isolation, even in silence, existence leaves a trace. Life interacts with the environment, shapes it, and is shaped in return. The city is not only a place of habitation, but a teacher of continuity, awareness, and reflection. And so, the last whisper does not end. It is not a conclusion, but an invitation to walk slowly, to notice, to reflect, to inhabit the spaces between absence and presence. To understand that even when names are lost, when languages vanish, when civilizations vanish, intention and consciousness persist. The city teaches this quietly, gently, insistently. Those who enter this space may leave without fully understanding. Yet something remains, a feeling, a rhythm, a resonance. The whisper lingers in the mind and body, extending beyond the boundaries of the city itself, inviting reflection long after the observer has departed. It is a message carried not in words but in awareness, patience, and attention. In this whisper, the city is immortal. Not through monuments, not through inscriptions, not through records, but through the persistent presence of its design, its geometry, its water, its shadow, and the invisible pulse of lives once lived. It endures as a meditation on existence, connection, and the quiet, profound continuity of human intention. And in the stillness, one realizes that the city's whisper is also a gift. It allows those who listen to inhabit its rhythm, to merge their own awareness with the echoes of invisible lives, to touch the extraordinary delicacy of a civilization that flourished where none should have, and to contemplate the vast, enduring mystery of human presence within the infinite world. Memory is often imagined as fragile, fleeting, stored in mines or fragile manuscripts. Yet this city demonstrates another kind of memory, one embedded in stone, soil, and water, encoded in geometry, proportion, and alignment. Here, memory is spatial, architectural, and eternal. Every street, every courtyard, every threshold preserves the echoes of human intention. Footpaths worn into stone and clay trace the movements of countless individuals across time. Walls, even in decay, reflect choices, care, and deliberate design. Each curve, each angle, each measured proportion is a fragment of thought made tangible, a conscious decision preserved in permanence. The geometry of the city is more than aesthetic. It is mnemonic. Courtyards, plazas, and halls follow subtle ratios, forming patterns that repeat and resonate. Spirals echo spirals, circles nest within squares, and alignments with celestial points suggest that time, sky, and human activity were understood as inseparable. Memory here is not a static record, but a dynamic, interactive experience. Paths through the city function as narrative threads. To walk them is to read a story without words. One follows footsteps, observes thresholds, feels the rhythm of plazas, and perceives the invisible choreography of lives once lived. Memory unfolds as movement, a tactile meditation on presence and intention. Even light and shadow contribute to this archive. The sun's passage across the sky animates walls and floors, tracing geometries designed to capture specific moments. Shadow marks the time of day, highlights thresholds, and emphasizes alignments. In the dance of illumination, memory is both experienced and transmitted, a quiet dialogue between environment and observer. Water is another layer of remembrance. Channels, pools, and fountains carry subtle information about daily life, ritual, and care. Flow patterns, or marks, and reflections preserve activity long after the actors are gone. The pulse of water mirrors the pulse of the city's inhabitants, embedding their presence in a medium both practical and poetic. The geometry itself is intentional, almost meditative. Repetition with variation creates rhythm. Symmetry with subtle asymmetry evokes balance. These architectural choices guide perception, regulate movement, and invite reflection. Memory is encoded not only in what is seen, but in how one moves through space, how one's attention is guided, how one's experience is orchestrated. In the geometry of memory, the invisible becomes tangible. Footprints, worn thresholds, post holes, and alignments act as signposts of human thought and care. They hint at labor, ritual, contemplation, and community. Even without names or written records, the city communicates these lives through the precision of its design. This architecture of memory challenges conventional notions of legacy. It suggests that permanence is not only found in monuments or texts, but in deliberate patterns, spatial reasoning, and careful attention to environment. Thought and intention can endure across centuries, hidden in geometry and proportionality, waiting for the attentive observer to perceive. The interplay between private and communal spaces adds depth to this memory. Intimate chambers, narrow corridors, and secluded alcoves preserve traces of personal acts, while plazas, watercourses, and processional pathways encode collective experience. Memory is both individual and shared, intimate and expansive, tangible and conceptual. Even in ruin, the city continues to teach. Collapsed walls, missing stones, and eroded floors do not erase intention. The geometry remains legible to those willing to observe, to move slowly, and to engage with the rhythms embedded in space. Memory persists, subtle yet enduring, present in proportions, alignments, and interactions of human activity with architecture. Walking through the city, one senses the layering of time itself. Every step connects the present to the past, linking observer and builder, transient moment and enduring structure. Memory becomes a lived experience, not a distant abstraction. The geometry of space guides thought, encourages reflection, and evokes the invisible lives that shaped it. The city teaches that memory is inseparable from environment. Thought, care, and attention leave traces not only in ephemeral artifacts, but in the very organization of space. Geometry becomes a vessel for remembrance, proportion a measure of awareness, and alignment a record of observation. Each element is a fragment of consciousness preserved for eternity. This city, found where no civilization should exist, embodies a profound meditation that human presence, thought, and care are not lost when names vanish, languages disappear, and societies fall. They endure in subtle patterns, in spatial memory, in the silent orchestration of stone, water, and shadow. The geometry of memory offers a final lesson. Awareness is both legacy and inheritance. By observing carefully, by walking slowly, by noticing alignments, thresholds, shadows, and water, one participates in the memory of the city. One becomes a witness, a guardian, a vessel for the whispers of invisible lives. Here, memory is not simply recalled. It is experienced, breathed, and inhabited. The city does not speak in words, but in proportion, rhythm, and alignment. It invites reflection, meditation, and wonder. The geometry of memory is a gift, a quiet, enduring bridge between the living and those long gone, between presence and absence, between the conscious mind and the world it shapes. The city has ceased its human rhythm, yet it continues to exist in a different, subtler cadence. No footsteps echo through the corridors, no voices fill the plazas, no hands tend the water channels. Yet life persists in the memory of the space, in the silent language of architecture, in the gentle choreography of stone, shadow, and water. Nightfall transforms the city. Light fades from walls and courtyards, leaving shadow to gather in quiet corners. The geometry of memory, once illuminated by sun and reflection, now becomes contemplative, introspective, offering space for observation rather than activity. The city exhales, it sleeps. This sleep is not emptiness. It is rhythm without motion, meditation without ceremony, presence without act. Even in stillness, the pulse of invisible lives lingers. Footpaths remain worn, thresholds retain their shape, watercourses continue to trace their paths. The city remembers, and in its remembrance, it breathes slowly and deeply, a calm that invites the observer to do the same. The absence of human activity emphasizes the poetry of quiet. Every fallen stone, every weathered tile, every shadowed alcove becomes meaningful. Silence transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. The city, abandoned yet alive, teaches that life endures not only in action, but in the careful composition of space and attention. In its sleep, the city reveals subtleties unnoticed during daylight. Moonlight, slipping through openings, illuminates patterns in the stone. Stars, reflected in pools of water, trace geometry in unexpected ways. Corridors, empty of motion, emphasize proportions, alignments, and rhythm. Each element becomes a note in a quiet symphony, composed to resonate with perception and reflection rather than utility. Even the sounds that remain are gentle and meditative. Wind whispers through collapsed walls and narrow corridors. Water murmurs softly in channels and pools. Occasional small creatures move quietly, their presence harmonizing with the enduring pulse of the city. This is not chaos. It is rhythm, subtle and deliberate, the city's own nocturnal song. Night accentuates contrasts that daylight obscures. Light and shadow play in more delicate patterns, revealing geometry and alignment in unexpected ways. The rhythm of human intention, once obvious in movement and activity, now manifests in stillness. Thresholds, plazas, and corridors retain their silent choreography, waiting for the attentive observer to perceive their language. The city's sleep teaches humility. Even in abandonment, it is vast and complex, intricate and deliberate. It is a reminder that human creation, however silent or forgotten, carries weight and continuity. Life need not be loud to endure. Intention, care, and attention resonate across centuries in the rhythm of spaces, proportions, and alignments. There is a meditative quality in walking through the sleeping city. Footsteps echo softly against worn stone, inviting attention to rhythm and timing. Shadows deepen perception, and light, though diminished, still traces geometry and pattern. Even without activity, the city interacts with the observer, shaping awareness, guiding attention, and evoking reflection. The pulse of invisible lives, once vibrant with labor, ritual, and motion, now slows to a calm, measured rhythm. It is not lost. It persists in thresholds, plazas, corridors, and water channels. It endures in stone wear, in spatial alignment, and in geometry. The city's sleep is an extended meditation, a continuation of its intent in a slower, quieter form. This nocturnal state offers a final lesson. Stillness is part of life, and absence can hold as much meaning as presence. The city, abandoned and silent, embodies continuity and endurance. It teaches that even when action ceases, memory, intention, and awareness can persist, waiting for recognition by those willing to slow down and observe. In sleep, the city becomes a mirror for the observer. It reflects patience, attention, and reflection back to the viewer. Walking through empty plazas and silent corridors, one feels the invisible pulse of human activity, the lingering rhythm of intention, and the enduring harmony of architecture and environment. Sleep, in this sense, is not merely rest but immersion, a participation in the city's calm and meditative presence. Even as night deepens and darkness spreads, the city remains alive in perception. Its geometry, thresholds, courtyards, shadows, and water continue to speak to those who pause, inviting reflection, meditation, and emotional resonance. The city's sleep is not absence. It is presence reimagined, subtle and profound. When the city sleeps, one realizes that life, intention, and consciousness are not defined solely by activity. They endure in patterns, rhythms, and structures. They are preserved in stillness, encoded in the geometry of memory, in the pulse of invisible lives, and in the subtle orchestration of environment. The city, silent yet expressive, invites the observer into a space of calm, reflection, and wonder. And in this quiet, one begins to understand the city's final gift. Even in places where no civilization should exist, even when names are lost, even when language disappears, life endures through intention, rhythm, and awareness. The city sleeps, and through its slumber, it teaches patience, reflection, and the enduring resonance of presence. Even after silence falls and shadows deepen, the city continues to speak, not with voice or sound, but with echoes carried through space, time, and perception. These echoes are subtle, intangible, yet unmistakable, a resonance that persists beyond stone, beyond thresholds, beyond the visible traces of human life. Walking through the city, one becomes aware of this lingering presence. Footsteps, though their source is long gone, seem to guide movement along worn pathways. Courtyards, though empty, suggest gatherings, processions, and moments of reflection. Every threshold hints at gesture and intention. The city communicates through these remnants, leaving a quiet imprint on the observer's consciousness. Stone itself becomes a vessel for memory. Walls, foundations, and columns preserve the intent of those who built them, translating human thought into geometry, alignment, and proportion. Even in decay, these structures transmit rhythm and awareness, offering insight into lives lived, labor completed, and rituals performed. The city's essence survives in form, pattern, and resonance. Water continues to reflect the sky, tracing faint geometries across floors and walls. Pools, channels, and fountains hold light and shadow, revealing hidden alignments, repeating patterns, and subtle choreography of movement. Each ripple carries fragments of invisible lives, a pulse that endures as long as one observes with care. The city's memory flows through water as clearly as through stone. The echoes extend into the intangible as well. Thought, curiosity, and attention preserved in the geometry and rhythm of the environment. The city teaches that human presence is not solely defined by action, but by awareness, intention, and reflection. Its design, subtle yet deliberate, ensures that every act, every observation, every pause contributes to a legacy far beyond what words could capture. Even the invisible becomes meaningful. Footpaths worn into stone, thresholds compressed by repeated use, corners polished by unseen hands. These traces form a silent language of human activity. They are reminders that existence, even when undocumented, leaves impressions. Life, thought, and care endure through subtle patterns, patiently waiting to be perceived. The city's echoes are amplified by reflection. To enter is to participate in an ongoing dialogue between observer and environment, past and present, visible and invisible. Every motion, every breath, every pause resonates with the rhythm of lives that have passed, merging memory with perception. The city invites mindfulness, patience, and emotional presence. There is a philosophical lesson here. Permanence does not reside solely in monuments or recorded history. It resides in intention, in the shaping of environment, in awareness embedded in space. The city demonstrates that human thought can endure not through language or proclamation, but through careful, considered interaction with the world. In this light, even absence becomes eloquent. Where stones have fallen, where walls have crumbled, where paths have been lost to time, the echo persists. Memory is embedded in proportion, in alignment, in geometry, and in rhythm. The city communicates its existence quietly, reminding those who enter that attention, observation, and intention are forms of continuity that transcend mortality. The city, hidden where no civilization should exist, offers a meditation on existence itself. Life is both fleeting and enduring, fragile yet resilient. The traces of labor, ritual, and reflection persist long after physical presence vanishes. Awareness, care, and deliberate action leave legacies that ripple across time, echoing beyond stone and structure, touching minds willing to perceive them. As one walks through empty corridors and silent plazas, the observer becomes part of this continuum, breathing slowly, moving intentionally, noticing thresholds, shadows, and water channels. Each act aligns the present with the memory of the past. One participates in the city's rhythm, becoming a witness, a guardian, and a vessel for echoes that have traveled centuries. Even in decay, the city offers solace. It invites contemplation of impermanence, resilience, and the subtle endurance of intention. Its echoes are not loud or dramatic, but gentle and persistent, resonating in the mind and body, guiding reflection and inviting emotional connection. The city teaches that beauty, meaning, and memory exist in subtlety, patience, and awareness. And finally, the city whispers a closing truth, that civilization is not only measured by conquest or record, but by the care, attention, and intention embedded in life itself. Even where no names remain, even where language has vanished, the pulse of living, thinking, and feeling continues. Its echoes reach across centuries, waiting for those who slow down, observe, and reflect to recognize them. The city's resonance extends beyond stone, shadow, and water. It inhabits perception, emotion, and consciousness. Every threshold crossed, every courtyard entered, every pattern observed contributes to an ongoing dialogue with existence itself. The city becomes more than a place. It becomes a meditation on presence, impermanence, and wonder. And in this understanding, the city transcends time. It is no longer merely a hidden civilization, but a testament to human awareness, intention, and memory. Its echoes, subtle and persistent, remind us that life, though fleeting, leaves traces that endure, that connect, that inspire reflection and awe. The city sleeps, but its whispers, its echoes beyond stone, remain, guiding thought, deepening awareness, and inviting serenity. In the final silence, one feels the lasting gift, that even where civilization should not exist, even where all signs of life vanish, the essence of being, of noticing, and of intention endures. The city speaks softly, endlessly, and the attentive mind listens, calm, reflective, and ready to drift into the quiet wonder of sleep.